Hey, Moose, it's just you and I today shooting the shit, talking about the OODA Loop. One, every single day I see bad OODA Loop everywhere. We recently saw people adding risk to the OODA Loop. Nothing wrong with
Ugh.
that, but it's just an indicator that they haven't looked deeply enough into what Boyd actually put into it. And I'm going to put this up front. My view, every day that we dive deeper into Boyd's work, is that the free energy principle by Karl Friston actually formalizes what John Boyd gave us. All right. Not
Mm.
everybody's going to agree with me on that. In fact, they'll attack us left and right on LinkedIn. And there are folks out there already writing poems about me and how I get things wrong. And you know who they are, and they know who they are. You know who you are. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk about the 4 Ps of OODA. Yeah, sorry. I'm just fired up about this stuff because
No, we believe in free speech here at No Way Out.
but this connects to what you're writing about on Substack with the cognitive warfare. I mean,
Yeah.
people need to understand the power of John Boyd's real OODA loop. So I want to run this by you today, but first I want to see what's going on in your world. What have you been up to?
Yeah, well, I've been taking what it is that you and I spring leaders one-on-one, oftentimes behind closed doors, to help them reorient, to help them craft their perception, understand that the war that they're in is not necessarily a physical business war. It's actually a cognitive war for perceptions, internally and externally. And once they get that, once they see that, you see it everywhere. You can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, you're virtually unstoppable. Everybody still thinks I have to have this much money, I have to have this much tech, this much software. And what they don't realize is the other paper that I'm working on, I don't want to say it out loud yet, but it's something to do with economics. What they don't understand is that the orientation is literally everything. And we keep coming back to that. We keep running into people that are trying to improve John Boyd's OODA Loop sketch by completely not understanding it and then completely taking all the power, draining all the power out of it. It's ridiculous. And it's exactly what you want your competition to do. So if for those leaders that are out there paying attention and they understand the nature of what we're actually in, then what's pervasive when it comes to teaching bad Boyd, which is an article title that we've had, or linear OODA Loop, you want your competition to do exactly that because you're going to beat them every single time. And here's the irony: they're going to do all the work for you.
Yeah.
And that's what these models perpetuate. This one specifically, I've not met this person. I do feel compelled maybe to reach out at some point rather than or I just throw the Iowa class broadside out at it because it's unfortunately people are actually taking it seriously, and I don't understand why. But you and I don't understand why, and others that we know don't understand why. For example, the live broadcast that you saw last night.
Yeah.
We understand Boyd's OODA Loop sketch, and they don't, simply because they don't know it. They don't understand it. They've reduced it. This particular thing, you could run a Monte Carlo on it and you can see that the odds are this person's never read a direct source of Boyd. They certainly haven't spent time in the archives like we have, or talking to acolytes like Chuck Spinney and Chet Richards and G.I. Wilson and others. So
we'll talk about Chuck Spinney today. I want to go back to something you brought up about last night. I got to join in Sarah Kernion's Substack going live, where she brought up John Boyd. And if you're not familiar with her work, you need to go listen to Tom. Is it Tom Woods? Is that correct?
Tom Woods, yeah.
Yeah, that podcast is spectacular. But Sarah is stepping out there, bringing Boyd's work and theories and ideas to 2 places in my mind. That's one, the world of non-speaking autistic children, what it's like to be a mother in that situation. And then 2, the cognitive warfare that's happening. So what we're seeing in her space is people are attacking her and contradicting their own views as they do that. Any more thoughts on that, Moose?
Yeah, so again, this is someone that understands the power of Boyd and Marshall McLuhan and what exactly they're telling us. And when you get into these sorts of situations where you're being attacked, once you understand these things as she does and as others do, it reverses on itself to the point where they end up doing all the work. There's nothing more rewarding than using someone's own words, not against them, watching someone use their own words against themselves.
Right.
because these things are overloaded in logical fallacies. These things are drenched in this just sort of soft language. And really it goes back to the two things that I've been putting up on Substack on the 5T protocol, and also too, the Guardians of Decay. And a lot of people are, quote, guardians of decay, wittingly or unwittingly, because what they don't understand, they understand symptoms. And they can look at symptoms and they can attack symptoms all day long. They have no understanding of systems.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where we're trying to help people make a difference in their observations of understanding that, in their sense making, and why it's easy to attract others like her and John Robb and others that are doing the same exact thing, that are looking at the system for what it is, knowing that, again, following Marshall McLuhan, that the medium is the message. And it's the tech and the environment or whatever. That's what's having a direct effect on us, because all of those things are extensions of us as humans.
Right.
And you misunderstand that, you're toast. If you understand that, you're gonna clobber your competition every time. In any endeavor where humans make decision.
So we're about 6 minutes in. Let's get into it. We're going to get into the world of reorientation to help people really understand John Boyd's observe, orient, decide, act loop. I'm going to do it through the 4 Ps. You've never heard me do this, Moose. Maybe you kind of heard us or me talk about it lightly here and there. But I want to start with we'll talk about Chuck Spinney here in a minute. But big picture is second law of thermodynamics, action perception loop. We'll talk about the perception action loop as well. We'll touch on the free energy principle. We're not going to talk much about the entropic OODA loop, but I want to get going with the external environment. And this is important because in the external environment, it could be physical, it could be social, it could be the organizational side. It's where living systems operate. And what do you know? What did John Boyd say about the external environment? Give me some thoughts.
About the external environment, it's our understanding of it, our comprehension of it is based off of our orientation, because our orientation implicitly guides and controls how we even understand and sense make in the external environment anyway.
He also said what? He said there's no way out of these things.
You can't get out of it. You can't get out of reorientation because it's drowning in mathematical imprecision, entropy, uncertainty, volatility, everything that causes friction for us as humans. There's no way out of reorienting. And if you stop reorienting, those things are going to consume you and kill you.
Right. So there are certain features of the world that we just cannot eliminate. And they're listed up there. You brought some of them up: entropy, numerical imprecision, mutations, quantum uncertainty. Today, people call them other names, right? There are affordances in the environment, which we may talk about. There's adjacent possibles. There's VUCA. We use volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity to understand the external environment. So to understand John Boyd's OODA loop, I believe you need to start with an understanding of the external world before we get into the internal world. And I want to go back to, you had a chance to talk to Chuck Spinney. You may be familiar with this sketch.
Yeah.
Just give us some background on this.
That's 4 hours. That seemed like 5 minutes to me, because just to sit there with Chuck and go over the stuff with him was phenomenal. But the critical point, and the graphic that you're using is from his Evolutionary Epistemology of Destruction and Creation, which is his interpretation of helping people understand destruction and creation. And to be fair, when this came out, this to me was the Rosetta Stone. And I'm happy to go, and I've done this with our clients. I'll go through this entire deck with them line by line, because destruction creation is very dense. It's very hard to understand, even though it's very brief. Chuck illuminates it in a way that if you don't get it, you're going to get rolled by your competition. You have to understand the difference between what's external in the world and what's internal in your perception.
Absolutely. So what the connection for me is, when I went back to reread this and I saw this diagram, this image, what he is essentially doing, and we're talking about Chuck Spinney here, is he's actually putting a blanket or a statistical boundary between the internal states of the OODA loop and the external world. Now, for those of you who've listened to some of our earlier podcasts on the free energy principle, this is known as a Markov blanket. Think about this. If you put a blanket around a cell, a neuron, a brain, a team, an organization, a state, a nation state, whatever, a universe, whatever it may be, it's a fractal approach to understanding what's internal to the system and what's external. So I want to build on what both the Markov blanket that we are borrowing from the free energy principle and what Chuck Spinney gave us here is we're going to separate the internal states of the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, with the external states of the external environment. So basic image here, this is a open system, has a boundary, has inlets and an outlet. This is a flow system. That's all it is. This is basic physics 101, right? External environment. And on that boundary, there are two things. There are sensory states. This is connecting back to the free energy principle. Sensory states are observations. And for those of you who may recall, John Boyd actually wanted to call it the SODA loop for sense, orient, decide, act. So sense for sensory observations. That's what that is on the left side of the OODA loop. And on the right side is the active states or action, right? So we actually have this capability where we sense or observe things from the outside world. They go through something in the internal states of the OODA loop, and then we take some type of action on the external environment to change either the environment or to solicit feedback from the environment to update what we're observing. So, Moose, thoughts on this? Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, this is the term that we've heard, perception is reality. It's not wrong.
Right.
It's true. Your perception is your reality.
So we'll get to perception in a moment. So I'm going to go with observe on the left side, our sensory states, and the middle there, it's just our orientation, right? So we'll go observe, orient. So when we observe something, you can think of our eyes, our nose, our mouth, our skin, a radar, whatever it may be, taking in some type of information from the external world and communicating that to an internal map, what we call orientation, a generative model, if you will, an internal map of the external world. So this information, these sensory signals that are moving from observations or our sensory states are what John Boyd called new information, right? Sensory signals are nothing more than new information. And they go in and they mix with, and you know what they mix with, Moose, just share with an orientation.
Yeah, everything. So who we are, where we're from, what we think, how we think, what are our psychological states, what's our cultural traditions, our heritage, our environment, our ability
what we
to handle
ate for breakfast, how many hours of sleep we got last night. It's genetics, cultural, and of course previous experience. So and that's already built into what John Boyd sketched in his OODA loop.
And this is exactly where I would almost say 100% of the linear OODA models completely fall apart with one punch. One punch. You don't even have to punch. You just go like that. Go boop. It falls over because orientation is everything.
Right. It's a Schwerpunkt. It's everything. So on that, I'm going to introduce the first P. Right. And you brought it up earlier. We talked about it. Perception.
Yeah. Perception
is constructed top down, inside out. We know from the work of people like Anil Seth, Clark, I'm sorry, I can't remember his first name at the top of my head. I also get Karl Friston. We know that they call perception a controlled hallucination. It's top down, inside out. It emerges from inside, just using humans right now, inside of our brains, inside of our bodies. Our perception of reality is constructed. It's a controlled hallucination, right? So where is that within the OODA loop? Well, it's the implicit guidance and control pathway that moves out of orient back to observe. For those of you who are familiar with the brain, you can say, hey, this might be what they call the reticular activating system. It acts as a filter. You can look at it as a default mode of how we observe the external world. It's rigid. You can also think of it as ego, right? Your ego is this pathway, perception. So thoughts on that, Moose?
Yeah, it's implicit guidance and control. This is, again, this is the finger push that you can topple the Jenga tower of every linear OODA loop model, just like that, because they don't factor in how our orientation, which is fractal. I have one, you have one, we have one as a collaborative duo. We have them as families, Marine Corps, navies, companies, everything. These things are fractal,
right?
And those orientations, in other words, our cognitive understanding of what it is that we're seeing, what it is that we're up against, that shapes how we see things. So some things that look like a crisis to somebody might look like an opportunity to somebody else, even though they're looking at the exact same thing. It's because their orientation creates a different perception.
So I'm going to add something in here. I'll just put an arrow in here that moves from orientation to action or active states, right? So there's something known as the action perception cycle or perception action cycle, however you want to call it. The problem with it oversimplifies how living systems actually interact with their environment. So when people talk about the OODA loop, they generally think of it as a linear process, like you brought up, but perception action, you update your internal orientation or you take action to change the external world, right? That's all we're trying to do as living systems. We're trying to minimize what is known as free energy, and we'll touch on that here in a second. But what we learned from the free energy principle is that the simple way of looking at the perception action loop is wrong. We need to look internally to the system, and that's what we're doing now, is building that internal system up using the framework of John Boyd's OODA loop. So perception, we have that. Let's go into the next thing here. I'm calling this pathfinding, and I don't know if it's going to fit with you or how it's going to sit with you, Moose. Let me explain why. Okay. So I recently sat in a conversation with Stephen Kotler. I think he's a best-selling author, wrote several books on flow states, right? So following a lot of work of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, individual peak performance, and he was also working with Dr. Michael Menino. They have a new article coming out, and I think it's with Karl Friston again. But this is that intuitive action, if you will. That autonomic response, the habits of mind that Dr. McCabe shared with us several episodes ago. It's that response you have when you do deliberate work for your technical skills. So think about basketball players, all that. But John Boyd called it Fingerspitzengefühl, right? It's that those processes. So when you think about teamwork, I'm going to transition from individual performance to teamwork now. In a team setting, pathfinding to me is those non-technical skills that you develop through deliberate work. So things that we present to you in the flow lab or the flow learning lab, we're trying to build up how you build or how you plan as a team. You need one shared expert mental model of how to plan. And the same is true with debriefing, same is true with communication. We're borrowing from aviation crew resource management and doing that, but that's that pathfinding pathway there. Might be a little redundant. Pathfinding is that implicit guidance and control pathway that moves out of orientation towards action. It doesn't mean it goes directly to the external world, but it feeds into the active states. Moose, I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it's I'll tell you why I love the term. Mary Boyd told us one of John Boyd's favorite movies was the 1990 rendition of Last of the Mohicans. Mm-hmm. Now, I went to an all-boys Catholic school that made us read all the books. So I had to read the leather stocking tales. There was the Deer Slayer, there was Last Mohicans, and Natty Bumppo, Nathaniel, the Daniel Day-Lewis character, that was one of his call signs, if you will, or one of his monikers, was the Pathfinder. And what were they doing? They were trying to understand their environment, to basically branch out. They were it's a tremendous OODA Loop movie. I think I know what the World Reorientation Movie Night is going to be this weekend, but nice. It's a I like that term, because ultimately think of like neural pathways too, right? Like we think of all these other things, like a pathway, like the way. I mean, I think it's acceptable. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll see how it sticks with listeners and all that. But again, I'm borrowing this from Stephen Kotler in a conversation I had with him a few weeks ago. I'd like, that makes sense. If it's an intuitive, they're looking at cognition 0, cognition 1 and 2. So kind of like system 1, right? This is that system 1 autonomic response to the world. From Daniel Kahneman. So to me,
and remember, the Pathfinder was a badass, right? So maybe that's why John Boyd loved I'm sure he read the books too as a kid. But he's trying to navigate what they call the inland sea, like the unexplored country the VUCA, the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity. We don't know what's out there beyond the colonial cities, like Philadelphia or whatever. As the further we go west into the frontier, there's more unknowns, and we have to rely on our orientation, our adaptability.
So let me throw this at you. So for using language from the Kernion framework, these are good practices, meaning that in pathfinding as a process or method or whatever it may be to go work in a complex environment as a team, you need those non-technical skills to do that. That's a good practice. It's a complicated thing to deal with complexity. So going back to your point about the Last of the Mohicans and the Pathfinder, does that still resonate with you? If those are
totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, more than the Deer Slayer, that was his other name. That was the other book, was the Deer Slayer, the Pathfinder, the Last Mohican. So,
got it.
But you couldn't be a Deer Slayer unless you're doing this either. So that's the other lesson, I guess.
Now, I want to put a note out to everybody here. We're not saying that you build perception first of Pathfinder. These are going on simultaneously within your OODA loop or your fractal OODA loops. All right. So I'm just
great point.
Yeah.
Because a lot of what Ponch just described is exactly how I've heard people that are, credentialed consultants saying, okay, so the first phase is I observe and I see what's going on. And then the next thing I do is I orient. Okay. Yeah. I start doing, and if you're doing that, you're basically saying, if you're Tom Brady, okay, the first thing I do is I'm going to squat down. I'm going to put my hands out. I'm going to call the snap. I'm going to step back and I'm going to drop back. If you're thinking like that, you're toast and you're going to get your clock cleaned.
No, I agree. So, okay, we have observe the sensory states, our sensory organs. They're sending some new information or sensory signals to orientation. Out of orientation, we have two things at the moment. We have perception and pathfinding. Perception is that top-down construction of our view of the external world. It also includes things like our ego, default mode of operation. The default mode of operating when it comes to pathfinding are those things that have to go through cycles of destruction and creation as well, right? So we don't always say, that's why we say there's no best practices, there's only good practices. That way you can go back and as the environment changes, as you learn more, you can refine those through a cycle of destruction and creation. So perception, pathfinding, emerging out of orientation. And we're going to move on to what emerges next, which should be, in this case, it should be decide, which is really a prediction or hypothesis, right? So the way I kind of look at decide here is it's like a fork, right? We're going to test a prediction potentially, or we're also going to run and test some hypotheses. And we'll get to those here in a minute. So decide, in this case, observe, orient, decide is a fork. And the first thing it does is it goes through a cycle of prediction. This is known as Bayesian inference. This is shows that humans are prediction machines. And what this is doing is it's comparing what the new information that's coming in to our internal model of the external world. So a common theme from the free energy principle is we're trying to minimize that surprise. We're trying to minimize the sensory signals coming in from the external world, right? Why is that? Well, our brains are 2% of our body weight. They burn 20 to 25% of our energy. So instead of taking all the information in from the external world, which could potentially kill us, and I like to talk to Sarah about this again, if autistic people are being overwhelmed by the sensory information coming from the outside world, how this kind of fits into her space. But anyway, we're trying to predict what's going on in the external world because that's a lower energy approach than to just soak in all the information that's coming into us. So it's a Bayesian approach. So this gets into statistics, and this is aligned to what we're learning in the free energy principle. Moose, help clean that up a little bit, man.
Yeah, I mean, again, people misunderstand the term decision, I think, in general. It's a hypothesis. It could happen. I'm doing this I'm not sure what's going to happen given the nature of uncertainty. And this goes back to how I not connected really, but like try to demonstrate the connection between what Boyd was saying and the Austrian economists were saying, is that I think something's going to happen. So I'm going to choose to act. I'm making the decision to act, but it's still all hypothetical. I don't know if it's going to actually work.
Well, we'll dive into that in a moment, but I want to go back. You and I had a conversation with Chet a few weeks ago, Chet Richards. And then something, I'm going to just look at my notes over here. He wrote that projection is making predictions, trying them out, and comparing that to what actually goes on. So the idea here is that Boyd already wrote that into, I'll get the right language here in a second.
Essence of winning and losing.
Yeah, I believe it's already in there.
Yeah,
so
it's already in there. But again, that's another thing that people have not read.
Yeah.
Oh, so, by the way, we should make a critical point about that. So, and we did say, I think we said it with Chet. The essence of winning and losing is the only place where John Boyd actually graphically illustrated the OODA loop. Period.
Yeah.
And it's the OODA loop in quotes sketch. Period. And it's also one of his shortest briefs. It's not very long. And people go right to that and they think, I'm just going to read this and I'm going to understand everything. And I'm telling you, if you go there and you haven't read any of the others, especially Destruction, Creation, Conceptual Spiral, you're absolutely hosed.
Absolutely. So I'm going to just read my notes here from that conversation. And we were talking about orientation. Many-sided implicit cross-referencing process of projection, empathy, correlation, and rejection. Mm-hmm. Chet pointed out that projection is prediction. He said that's what Boyd was getting at. And what we're saying with prediction here is that we are trying to figure out the causes behind the sensory signals that are coming through us from our sensory states. What is that thing that's on the outside world, that information that's coming out to me, right? We're predicting that. We're anticipating that. This is that whole predictive processing thing that's already inherent inside of the way John Boyd explained the OODA loop and sketched it, right? It's predictive processing, Bayesian inference. This is where we're trying to minimize surprise or minimize variational free energy. And this is that connection back to the free energy principle, which again, I believe formalizes John Boyd's OODA loop. So minimizing variational free energy, and we'll talk about expected free energy here in a minute. All right. Mm-hmm. Any more thoughts on this, Moose?
No, I mean, this is the critical part. A decision is a hypothesis. It's just like, at least in the old days of the United States, they taught the scientific method, and you had a hypothesis. Yeah. I think this is going to happen, and I'll find out. And how will I find out? Well, I'll observe, and I'll see what happened, and I'll reorient.
Yeah, so let's build on that. So this is now we're going to anticipate what to do next, right? This is the planning portion of the OODA loop. It's course of action development. It's counterfactual thought. What if scenarios? It's running a simulation internal to the system, right? So this pathway here is I have a hypothesis about what I'm observing or what I want to have happen, and I'm going to run it internally before I actually execute on it on the outside world. So inside of this is a connection to the free energy principle where they talk about expected free energy. And expected free energy, are you ready for this, is uncertainty and risk, right? Right. So you do not need to add risk to John Boyd's observe, orient, decide, act loop. It's inherent in the system, in the way we're drawing it. So any more thoughts on that, Moose?
I mean, again, a very simple rudimentary reading would have told you that you can't, this is not an additive process.
Right. So that's that planning that happens. It's that simulation. And I'm going to make a point here that you and I need to go look back at naturalistic decision-making, recognition prime decision-making, and look at the free energy principle and compare them all under this understanding of John Boyd's OODA loop. And I believe RPD, recognition prime decision-making, is going to become OBE by this explanation of the OODA loop, because it creates situational awareness. It already does those things, has a simulation built into it. I sat down with Gary Klein years ago before I learned about the free energy principle, before I really understood John Boyd's OODA loop to where to what we're talking about today. But given what I know now compared to what I knew then, I believe Boyd was way, way, way advanced in this thinking.
I told it to Mary, his daughter, just in the last week or two. Because of AI, we might be able to try to catch up to your father.
Yeah.
It's reality.
Yeah. So let's build this out some more. All right. So there we have it. We have the 4 Ps of the OODA loop: perception, pathfinding, prediction, planning. It doesn't mean we're changing the OODA loop. We're just using them to amplify what the pathways mean, right? Orientation remains the Schwerpunkt, remains the focal point, remains the internal model of the external world. What I do want to point out here is when you look at pathfinding and how it interacts with action and planning, I want to point out something that I brought up earlier. A single expert model of planning shared across a team will help you improve your planning process. This includes things like red teaming. How do you use red teaming techniques in your planning process? So I'm talking about a team here, not individual. Individuals can do this to a certain extent. But when you build those skills up, like think, write, share, which requires a lot of energy to do for those of you who may have been clients or are thinking about becoming clients, that is a high energy approach. All right. That requires a deliberate system to approach to learn how to do that autonomically or automatically throughout when you do it in the future. Right. So pathfinding would be those effective methods that improve your planning. And let's take this up a level. For strategy, your strategy is dependent on understanding the external environment, right? It's improving that internal orientation or building a map of the external world. And the way you do that is you have to have methods. You don't hire McKinsey to do this. It's probably the dumbest thing you can do in the world, by the way, right? You don't outsource your strategic thinking to other people. If you're doing that, you're dead. I guarantee you that. Yeah,
and you would have found you could have paid us a lot less.
Yeah.
And gotten 10 times, 100 times more value, but whatever.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Hans and Franz. Hear me now and believe me later. If you don't do this, your company's dead. All right?
Done.
100%. You have to take these approaches, and a lot of this is built in the flow system, and a lot of it's built into adaptive strategy. A lot of this is what you're doing with your clients, Moose. But this is it. If you do not understand this, you're about to get your ass kicked. Now, this applies to artificial intelligence. This applies to strategy, teamwork, leadership, leaders' intent, affordances, attractors, all these things. Hell, we can even apply this to understanding different modalities of combating PTSD and TBI, including psychedelic assisted therapy. Why? Because they're using the free energy principle to explain that now.
Yeah.
We can apply this to behavioral economics because we have Patrick Skotanis on the show who's using this now. We can use this to explain peak performance and flow states. Why? Because Stephen Kotler and others are using this now. This isn't magic. This is two knuckleheads named Moose and Ponch figuring this out with John Boyd's acolytes and saying, hey, this is a weapon system
that everybody's designed with for free.
Yeah, you don't go and implement that. You're already doing this.
Yeah, you're already doing it.
You're already doing it. Right now, you're doing it. And if you understand it, you're going to destroy your competition. You're going to thrive and survive, and you're going to have that capacity for free and independent action. So
I will tell you too. Yeah, I mean, it was actually engaging with the client where this forthcoming project that you're aware of that will come forward. It all came back to this idea of you're already doing this and it's right in front of your face.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, some people are pushing back on this and I get it because they didn't come up with it. We didn't come up with this. We just visited the archives and were asking questions.
That's it. We're still asking, by the way. It's all ING stuff. Ponch already said it. Learning, asking, planning, red teaming, it's constantly a continuous ongoing process. We don't write, we're writing. Yeah. And then we sometimes we change our minds. McLuhan and Boyd were really good at changing their minds. And they, I think the OODA loops actually are a really good place to talk about that, because when Boyd was figuratively talking about OODA loops in Patterns of Conflict, which again, no one ever read, it was not what it evolved into. What it evolved into is that he realized that this is actually how our cognition understands reality and how we engage with reality.
Yeah. Yeah. What many people connect the OODA loop to in the cockpit of fighter aviation. Yes, it applies there. Yeah, 100%. But it didn't emerge from there, right? John Boyd was a fighter pilot, but he looked at different disciplines. And I'm going to use the word consilience. It's basically pulling from multiple disciplines to see the overlap there, right? That's what John Boyd did. And what we're seeing today is, I hate to call it a theory of everything. I know are people talking about that now, but this is about as close to a sketch of everything that you can imagine. And I I know Stephen Collier
Because
pushes
everybody
back.
does it.
Yeah. Those that don't understand it look at me like you're absolutely out of your mind. Let's just observe when we decide to act. I'm like, really? Some man spent 40 years of his life after he created the energy maneuverability theory, after he looked at looked at the Toyota production system, says, oh, it's really simple. You observe, then you orient, then you decide, then you act.
Well, you heard Sarah brought it up last night too. He was a special needs dad. This guy was he had chaos and change all around him his entire life. If you go back and look, that's why his biography is so important, because you get a better context of where he came up with a lot of this stuff. It's not just limited to fighter aviation. And I think that's where it's not that doesn't have an important part, because it does.
Yeah.
If you think that's everything, we want our clients, we want their competitors to think that is the way to do it. Because I want the competition running out on OODA-R. There's your counterintelligence strategy. Get them running on OODA-R. Get them running on linear OODA loop.
Moose, I just realized today is May 13th. It's Top Gun Day.
Top Gun Day.
This is the most important podcast you should be listening to today. We're going to push it out as soon as we're done here. You want to do that? This is the Top Gun brief of the OODA Loop. This is the most important brief you'll ever have. And if you don't like it, that's your thing. There's other things you can learn.
Yeah. Now I'm going to ask a dumb Marine question, because I know those movies backwards. Was that the day that the last action in Top Gun?
Let's see. The movie was released on May 16th. May 13th was picked as the official Top Gun day.
Okay.
So, yeah. So that was 19. I don't know.
I think it's also for we just have a new pope for all the Catholics out there. I think May 13th is also the apparition of Fatima.
Really?
So,
wow.
Yeah. So there you go. Yeah, it's the feast. Oh yeah, today's the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima, Catholic devotion.
All right, we're gonna get this up and
there's no accidents. There's no accidents.
May 13th is Top Gun Day.
By the way, the Pope actually, so I did, if you saw my article about Leo the 14th, the new pontiff, formerly known as Robert Francis Cardinal Prevost. I learned it's Prevost, not Prevost. Who's from Chicago. The Pope is from Chicago. He's a Sox fan. He's a Bears fan. He's a Blackhawks fan. I mean, this is huge. And he went to Villanova, and as others will tell you, Sarah would say, if Villanova fans were annoying enough, now the Pope went there. Anyway, what I was writing about was how, based off of his first homily, so his sermon in his first mass as Pope, it seems to me that his orientation, at least what he said, is that he actually understands that there's an information in cognitive war, which is the predominant prevailing theme across the globe. And in the selection of the name Leo the 14th, if you go back and you know your history about Leo the 13th, Leo the 13th wrote a famous encyclical, which is a papal pronouncement on some topic. In this case, it was on labor. It was called Rerum Novarum. And Leo the 13th was recognizing the trends back then of what was being caused by the industrial age, the things that were being thrown. And so now it seems that Pope Leo the 14th, his successor in name too, is talking about the same type of thing. So I would predict, back to prediction, hypothesis, I would predict that his first encyclical is something major around that topic, because he came out of the gate swinging on that. And then, of course, when a pope comes out, any pope, anytime, there's sometimes I did get an email like, how do you know so much about this stuff? And I could go down the list of being, Catholic school my whole life, being a knight of the Order of the Holy Sepulchre, every time a pope comes out, both camps claim him. Oh, he's a conservative. Oh, he's a liberal. Oh, he's a conservative. Like all of a sudden, not even a week, you're starting to see the commentary that the left is now upset that he's not a liberal based off what he said at one mass. Now he's they're afraid that he might actually be Catholic or whatever. And you're already seeing the fifth generation war unfold. You're already seeing the cognitive war go and unfold. So, it's not a judgment on whether the Pope's a conservative, liberal, or whatever. The judgment is take it all in and understand that it's a perception war. It's a cognitive war. And if you understand that, you can start to filter through a lot of the noise.
So everything we just talked about in the last 40 minutes, it connects back to the cognitive warfare.
Everything.
Yeah. And if you understand what we just went through, you'll understand what's happening to you and what you can do to others. Remember, leadership and manipulation are different sides of the same coin, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. So if you understand what we just explained, you'll have an advantage.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, you're going to be taken advantage of, right?
Every time.
Yeah.
There's no way out. Like, I mean, that's the thing. There's no way out. If you can orient poorly, and that's fine.
Yeah.
It's disconnected. That's cool. You could think you're doing it well. Why? I learned this at Harvard. They taught us this in the MBA school. Cool.
Nobody's teaching this, man.
No, but
we're
so I'm actually working on an article right now that basically says, if you're working with us and you haven't read Destruction and Creation and you don't understand OODA Loop sketch, we're not going to work with you.
Yeah.
We're going to go work with your competitors, because you're going to rely on what you're going to rely on your education, what your consultants told you, whatever. And really all you needed was to read Destruction and Creation to understand the OODA Loop sketch. It's kind of like when years ago he just stepped down as CEO. I used to go out every May, earlier, like it was always like Derby weekend, to go to the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting. And I went several times, and it's really interesting to go and listen. Great OODA orientation exercises. I could talk about this. We could do a whole episode on this. Anyway, one of the things I'll never forget was that Buffett he would take questions open mic, he and Charlie Munger. And this guy would get up and like a bunch of them would say the same exact thing. I've read all your books. I've read all your letters. I went to Penn just like you did. I went to Columbia Business School. I did everything. Why am I not a multi-bazillionaire like you? And Buffett would say, because all you had to do was understand behavioral, how to think about market ups and downs, and how to value a business. Everything else is filler, because everything else that you learn in business school is just all filler. And I think from our perspective, what that means to us is, okay, if you understand Destruction and Creation and you understand OODA Loop sketch, everything else is just a distractive filler. Everything else is meat. We can put a lot of meat on that, and we do.
Yeah.
But if you don't understand those things fundamentally, forget about it. It doesn't matter.
Well, hey, Moose, that was 43 minutes, man. That was fun. Let's get this out there. It's May 13th, Top Gun Day. We'll put the 4 Ps out there. Hopefully it'll make sense to our listeners. They can go ahead and comment, throw some questions to us on Substack on the World of Reorientation. Please go out there to the World of Reorientation. Find out what Moose has been writing about. Go to Sarah Kernion's what's Substack? Inchstones. Go see how she's using these ideas to really get ahead of what RFK put out a few weeks ago on autism. There's a lot going on in the world. And of course, if you're putting R or risk at the end of the OODA loop because you need to, that's your choice. You can do what you want. Yeah.
I mean, even the graphic is an inward spiral. It's like irony is not lost on these. Anyway.
Yeah. And listener reached out and said, hey, you got to listen to the All In podcast. I think it's about episode about a week ago. They talk about the OODA loop in there. They use the linear OODA loop. Yeah, that's okay. But again, please learn the real OODA loop. That's why we're here.
I do. So I am drafting an article about OODA-R as a professional rejoinder, because, NATO generals are reading that, and you look at the people who are commenting on LinkedIn, and all I want to talk about is how it just utterly disregards and distorts all the core insights from Boyd's major works, all of them, not some, all, particularly those that deals with orientation, adaptation, tempo, collapse, evolving evolution. It disregards all of Boyd's brief to some extent, some completely, like Essence of Winning and Losing. It's a complete rejection. Yeah. Destruction and Creation, fundamentally, it completely disregards that. Now, I don't know how you say that you're improving Boyd and you fundamentally completely ignore his core work that he riffed everything and built everything off of. So that's,
I don't think we need to improve Boyd. We need to improve how we understand Boyd, right? That's what we're saying here. I want to point out a few things. In the last 40 minutes, we covered what we shared with you covers cognitive warfare. It covers cybersecurity. It covers strategy, leadership, teamwork.
12-year-old basketball.
12-year-old basketball, artificial intelligence. How does PTSD, TBI get mitigated through different modalities, including psychedelic assisted therapies, right? Breathing exercises. How does that fit into that? By the way, Chet brought that up in our episode with him, where he talked about yoga and the importance of implicit guidance control, and how breathing helps us become present, which is a key enabler to being in a state of flow. So we covered flow, we covered flow states, we covered the Toyota production system in 40 minutes, right?
I know somebody that I will introduce you to that says that's a psychedelic advocate that says that breath work is more powerful than the psychedelic medicine.
Yeah. And let's wrap it up on this. So Wim Hof last night did some great Wim Hof breathing, 20 minutes of it last night. Fantastic. 2 weeks ago, I shared a vagus nerve breathing with a bunch of 7th grade girls on a basketball team. They used that when they were down at halftime in their championship game. They were down by 13 at halftime, came back to win by 24. They let the other team score 1 point in the second half. All right. So these things, correlation, causation, I get it. They may work, but this is all built into what we just explained through 35 minutes, 45 minutes of the OODA loop. So and using the 4 Ps. So let's wrap it up there. You got the last thoughts, Moose.
Yeah. Last thought is, as Ponch said, get over to the world of reorientation. We've had a really nice uptick in paid subscribers, and the paid subscribers that put skin in the game are that's where we get a lot of our feedback. So they're the ones that are able to comment. They're also the ones that are able to participate in our chat room, which is closed to, in fact, I have an article coming out. I'm going to probably put out next week or the week after, of somebody writing a nasty restack saying that, I liked your stuff, but you don't open up comments or whatever, and it's not a subscriber. And you go and you start to look at this guy's writings in this 5T. I know why he's pissed, because he wanted to crap on the Pope or whatever he wanted to do. So, but it's actually, it worked out being kind of like the Autism Mommy Wars thing that I put out. It actually works out to be a really instructive lesson for people that are paying attention. And I'm getting a lot of really good feedback from leaders that are saying that, hey, I love how you took a real world example and showed me exactly what's, around me all the time. So that's coming out. The other thing too, I've been putting in these things. I don't know if it's the right name, but I call them the Devastator. So I throw out like a logical devastation of LinkedIn. I forget what else I've put in there right off the Pittsburgh Pirates organization, because I'm in Manhattan and born of New York parents, but raised in Pittsburgh, so I love them too. And it's just a disaster, and it's just a devastating. Again, it's all incorporating Boyd and McLuhan and whatever. Kind of following Chuck's example, because I think his thing was called the Blaster. He would call them blasters. And I just thought of like Devastator, like a JDAM or a Tomahawk coming in through a window. So those are in there as well. And then I know that you're working on some stuff too that you'll limit to our paid subscriptions inside the chat, and we'll get a really good forums in there. So
cool, man. That was fun. We'll see you here soon, Miss.
There's no way out.